accused of ethnic cleansing against minority Muslims in Myanmar. Human Rights Watch says government security forces did nothing to stop the violence and even took part in it. The report comes as the European Union lifts sanctions against the country and the president is given a top peace award. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Ghida Fakhry. Authorities in Myanmar stand accused of a campaign of ethnic cleansing of Rohingya Muslims. A report by Human Rights Watch says their actions amount to crimes against humanity, including murder, persecution and deportation. It relates to violence in Myanmar's western Rakhine state in June and October of last year, in which more than 200 people were killed and over 100,000 were forcibly displaced. The report found extensive state involvement and planning in the killings and destruction of property. It said community leaders and Buddhist monks also played a role in the killings, along with police and army personnel. The report also criticized the government of President Thein Sein for failing to bring those responsible to justice. Myanmar's government has denied the charges made in the report and plans to publish its own findings. Veronica Pedrosa has more.
Ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity. Legal terms for horrific crimes that Human Rights Watch says were committed in Myanmar last year.
You know, the government has consistently characterized what's been going on as purely communal violence. We've in fact documented extensive evidence indicating a high level of involvement from the state in these abuses.
In the first wave of violence in June, Buddhist Rakhines, also known as Arakanese, and Muslim Rohingya mobs clashed. Both communities were swept up in a storm of killings and arson. Both communities suffered. But since then, the violence turned sharply anti-Muslim. HRW has found that at first, state security forces did nothing to prevent the violence. But then they joined with Rakhine mobs to attack and burn Muslim neighborhoods and villages. This image, provided by HRW, shows ethnic Rakhines with weapons walking away from a village in flames, while a soldier stands by. On June the 13th, HRW reports eyewitnesses said they watched as a government truck dumped 18 naked and half-clothed bodies of Rohingya in a pile. Al Jazeera has seen photographs of the dumped bodies, too graphic for broadcast, that corroborate the witnesses' descriptions that some bodies still had their hands bound and appear to have been killed execution style. At least one was a child. They were buried in 2 pits marked by makeshift bamboo fences. But when HRW asked Myanmar President Thein Sein in a letter what authorities had done with the bodies of the killed, his office replied in a fax that, quote, the dead bodies of Bengalis were buried in their religious cemeteries with the arrangement of Rakhine state government, unquote. The report also documents new evidence about the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Rakhine state right now. Tens of thousands of people need food, medical care and shelter, but the government's doing very little to change the situation. Veronica Pedrosa, Al Jazeera.
We'll go to our guest in just a moment. First, though, on the line from Yangon in Myanmar is Win Tin, a founding member of the National League for Democracy, along with Aung San Suu Kyi. He's also a former political prisoner. Mr. Win Tin, Human Rights Watch has said it is baffled by the fact that your party, the NLD, its leader Aung San Suu Kyi, have remained quiet about the atrocities that have been committed against the Rohingya people. Why haven't you been denouncing these crimes more forcefully?
She is silent because she cannot speak out, you see, everything. Because really, you see, we are not the government. She is just a political party's leader, you see. So she cannot speak what she doesn't know all the things, you see, what happened there and what is the causes and what is happening and so on.
But Mr. Wintin, what is happening is very well documented. Even though the burden of action does fall on the government, shouldn't Aung San Suu Kyi, the most prominent opposition member in Myanmar, be using her moral authority to denounce what is going on?
It is not very easy for me to comment about the reason why she is silent and so on. The only thing I can tell you is that, you see, she has to keep quiet on some of the things which she doesn't know all the things, what happened and so on.
But is it really because she doesn't know what is going on, or because she has her eye on the election in 2015?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Because people, you see, concerned are only a small part of the country. So it doesn't matter for her election. I think she is quite free if she wants to express what she thinks.
Mr. Wintin, it was really good talking to you. Thank you. Let's go straight to our guest now. In Kuala Lumpur, Maung Zarni, a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics and founding member of the Free Burma Coalition. In Singapore, Alistair Cook, a visiting research fellow at the East Asian Institute of the National University of Singapore. And in London, Mike Harris from the Index on Censorship, an international organisation that promotes and defends the right to freedom of expression. Maung Zarni, the government rejects the findings of this Human Rights Watch report. Is there any reason to question the credibility of this report that accuses the government of a campaign of ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya people?
No, you know, the Human Rights Watch is not simply the premier human rights research organization in the world. This is by far the very best and most solidly researched report I have ever seen in the past 10 years as a professional researcher with the in higher education. So there's absolutely no basis for the Burmese regime to reject this or dismiss this report as non-credible. As a matter of fact, the report that the Burmese regime said it's going to bring out, actually, in I think tomorrow, 23rd April, is the least credible and the most dubious piece of document they're going to bring out. And we will get into that during the course of discussion, because I know the people that were involved in the process of investigating the rights abuses from the government side.
You say it's a solidly researched piece of work, obviously not what the government in Myanmar thinks. Alistair Cook, the Myanmar government has accused Human Rights Watch of timing its report to coincide with the EU decision to lift sanctions. Does that undermine the report's credibility, its objectivity?
No, not at all. I think what we've seen with this report is it's very well documented, as Zarni had said. And in fact, if the government spokesman is saying that it's based on biased media analysis, if you just turn to the methodology of the report, you will quickly find that it's interviewed dozens of people on the ground in 5 of the most affected areas in Rakhine State. So I think it's disingenuous to say that. But certainly there are public relations with all these sorts of reports, and timing to get the most impact is obviously key as well. So certainly you can't discount that it's come out at the same time. But this has been documented over a very long period of time, which is outlined in the report.
What does it tell us, though, about the EU's motivations and calculations, Mike Harris? Is the EU effectively ignoring its own set of benchmarks, its own set of conditions that were once attached with the lifting of these sanctions? They called for, quote, at one point, an end to all internal conflicts, freedom for all political prisoners, unfettered humanitarian access to the country, and, crucially here, an end to the persecution of a Muslim minority. Obviously, that hasn't happened.
No, and the fear is that the European Union have eased the sanctions, in fact, too early. What I think we'd like to see, and what civil society in Burma would like to see, is a clear framework for EU engagement, and in fact the engagement of the international community with the Burmese government. There are still many restrictive laws and draconian laws in place in Burma. When we look at these conflicts, the space for civil society to protest for peace is actually curtailed. Newspapers deal with the ethnic conflict very sensitively. It's clear that lots of newspapers hold their tongue while reporting on human rights violations because they fear that they may be subject to criminal defamation proceedings by the government, or that their licences for publishing daily could be withdrawn. So there's also a free speech element to this, in that audiences in Yangon or Mandalay actually have a very limited access to information about the conflict and the scale of the conflict.
Maung Zarni, do you feel that this EU decision is inappropriate, that it is premature? Is it all to do with political expediency, in a sense, trying to reap all the economic trade benefits that exist in Myanmar, regardless of what abuses may be going on?
Well, the European Union's common position on Burma is anything but about the Burmese freedom or human rights or the well-being of the Burmese people. It has everything to do with the European commercial and strategic interests. And, you know, the Eurozone has been in crisis, and European economies are not doing well. Everybody knows it. And so Burma is seen through the eyes of the European strategic and commercial interests as a strategic location sandwiched between China and India, and also as one of the largest remaining brothels of natural resources. You know, the benchmarks are not met. As a matter of fact, you know, like within the past 1 year, since the EU set benchmarks for Burma, we have seen, you know, a series of waves of violence that merit or that warrant actually international criminal investigation by the United Nations, and also increase in the massive military operations against Christian Kachin communities in northern Burma. And so within the past year, things in Burma for minorities, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, as well as Burmese farmers have gotten worse, not better. And yet the European Union has gone ahead to reward the Burmese military quasi-civilian government of Thein Sein with such economic feat.
Well, it isn't just the EU heaping praise on Myanmar. As well as winning support from the European Union, President Thein Sein has also been chosen to receive a prestigious Peace Prize. The In Pursuit of Peace Award, as it is known, is from the International Crisis Group. It recognizes individuals for their outstanding contributions to the advancement of peace and security. It praises the President of Myanmar for his efforts to, quote, bring us closer to a world free of conflict. Alistair Cook, President Thein Sein, being honored by the ICG in this top peace award. Is it deserved when you consider that he's been in power for now 2 years, that the abuses that have been taking place haven't taken place under the previous junta's leadership, but under his own watch, both in June and October of last year? Should he bear direct responsibility for what is going on?
Well, I think there are two questions there. The first one is he deserving of this award? Well, firstly, it's obviously not for peace that's already been achieved, so it's for peace that could be achieved. So I guess that's the first point. And the second point, over whether enough's being done to move these processes forward across the country. What we're seeing with the release of this report, or even what's happening in Kachin State, or indeed some of the other ethnic nationality areas as well, is that there is conflict still ongoing. So at the moment the signs aren't there, but I think the motivation that ICG have for this award is positive reinforcement, I think they would frame it as. But has peace been achieved? No, it hasn't.
Do you agree with this, Mike Harris? How much of a pinch of salt should this statement by the ICG and indeed the award itself be taken with?
Well, I won't criticise the ICG because they do good work, but what I would say is that there's two things going on here. There's a country in which there is serious ethnic conflict, and there's also a country which is in transition. And there's no doubt that under the President there have been some reforms which have been positive. It's clear that Parliament is having a greater role in the internal matters of the country. It's clear that Parliament and the opposition as well are in the process of considering legal reform to open up the space for civil society and freedom of expression. That said, it's still the case that the military are able to operate separate from the president and from parliament, and are committing serious human rights violations. And it's the interplay between these two things which I think is quite complex. Burma could have successful democratic elections in 2015, but as we said with the EU and sanctions, I think it is very, very early stages, and all of the and this draconian legal framework is still in place. It's just not being enforced. Plus, you have these human rights violations. So I think it's a mixed picture. We can see that there is reform, and we can see that political leaders such as Aung San Suu Kyi are out of prison, but you have this in the midst of a great deal of internal instability.
Maung Zarni, a lot of people accused of looking the other way. Human Rights Watch has also expressed its bafflement about why Aung San Suu Kyi, someone of her international stature, political opposition figure within Myanmar, hasn't been more forceful in her comments condemning the violence. Is it because she has an eye on the election in 2015 and has significant political calculations in mind as well?
Well, I mean, she's been in a difficult situation, no doubt. But at the same time, I have watched her very closely, and we shared a panel at the London School of Economics last year, June. And when the issue of Rohingya ethnic cleansing came up, I was the one who was asked to address the question of the ethnocide and the citizenship of the Rohingya people, at the forum. But I want to return to the International Crisis Group, role here.
But first of all, how important do you think would it be for someone like Aung San Suu Kyi, a pro-democracy icon in many parts of the world? How important is it for her to speak more forcefully about what is going on?
Oh, absolutely. It is extremely important for her to speak out. Actually, she needed to have, she needs to actually, call what is happening in the country basically as a neo-fascist racism, because that's what it is. When I started using the word neo-Nazi Buddhist movement, people thought I was exaggerating. Well, that was about almost like 8 or 9 months ago, and now there is a very nascent and growing movement in the country that is openly actually ignored by the Burmese military government, if not actively supported, and that is targeting Muslim communities across the country, not just the Rohingya. I mentioned the ICG here because ICG is explaining away why why ethnic conflict is flaring up, and is using the language of transition. Actually, if you look at the Human Rights Watch report's language, it categorically stated there is states crucial involvement in the waves of violence against Rohingyas, and now actually, about 2 weeks ago, against the Muslims across 15 cities and towns in Burma. And so the ICG is playing a role of legitimizer. This is the ethnic conflict, especially religious conflict, has nothing to do with Burma opening up and liberalizing. It has everything to do with the Burmese state under the management of Thein Sein, manipulating, in quotes, natural ethnic and religious prejudices for political and strategic ends.
Alistair Cook, is everyone at the end of the day playing politics here? How surprised, how disappointed will human rights advocates, activists around the world in Myanmar be about Aung San Suu Kyi's conspicuous silence? The fact that she has been very timid in her statements, all she has said to date is something to the effect that it is sad that the situation has come to this, and that she has been urging everyone to respect law and order. Surely the atrocities that have been committed in the past year or so, the documented evidence we have seen about abuses being committed against the Muslim communities in Rohingya would warrant, wouldn't they, a more forceful approach and a response from someone like her?
Right, well, what I would say here is that when we're looking now at what's going on in Myanmar, Burma, is we have to focus on interests, that it's no longer some sort of unstable transition where people are making these coalitions. There are very many different layers to what's going on there, and there are lots of different actors with very different motivations. Now, when we're looking at what's going on here, yeah, it is surprising, and many in the international community have been surprised at either the broad statements being made rather than specifically addressing the human rights concerns in Rakhine State by Aung San Suu Kyi. But also, I think what we're seeing as well is that the opposition needs to be more than just one person. We are seeing a personality-driven reform process at the moment, and so we also have to look out for who else is voicing their opinions. And in this regard, we've seen the Student Generation 88 leadership come out and speak about this directly. So they're obviously now starting to play a greater role, and I imagine we'll be seeing a lot more of them in informal politics there.
Sure. Mike Harris, I want to get back to the issue of the European Union deciding to lift sanctions against Myanmar. How much of this normalization has to do with the idea of securing as many gas and oil exploration contracts as possible for some of the major European companies?
Well, I think the reason that the military and the government of Burma have opened up and have begun engaging is because they realised they were overly reliant on China. And so in their reaching out to the West, the US and the EU, this is the reason that the part of the reason why the transition is happening. And, there are these small steps towards a more democratic Burma. From the EU's position, I think there's various factors at play. I mean, the EU don't want to put off the process of transition. Very small steps have been made, and I think the EU's calculation was that because of these small steps, there should be some reward for the government of Burma. Whether they've made this decision too early, it's certainly possible. Especially with this ongoing ethnic conflict.
But I think also it's worth... Doesn't it, though, diminish the EU's leverage with the government in Myanmar? How do you then put pressure on them if you've given them essentially everything they want?
Well, I think there's, I think this is the problem. I think if you lower the sanctions, you've lost your most effective tool. But we've got to remember, only 18 months ago, and it's still the case today, that protesting in the streets of Mandalay or Yangon or wherever, the people I was speaking to when I was on the ground, protesting comes with significant risks. And there are still large numbers of peace demonstrators who have been arrested, detained under Section 505 of the Penal Code. So, it's a very, very difficult situation.
Maung Zarni, how do you then resolve this conflict, this difficult situation, if, as we've been saying, the EU has already decided it's time to lift all sanctions except for the arms embargo, if the NLD, which is the main opposition party, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League of Democracy, has decided not to take on the government on this issue? How do you resolve this conflict?
Well, it's very, very difficult. I mean, as a Burmese, I like to be optimistic and hopeful about my country's future, and particularly resolving conflicts peacefully, ethnic or religious or political. I lived there for 25 years, and I knew what it was like to fight against a regime that was backed by the entire financial and military might of the Western powers. And now I think that our country is moving into that phase of the West using the language of democratic transition in Burma, Suu Kyi sitting in the parliament as a benchmark or successful benchmark, and yet, backing the military, whatever it does, giving them an international impunity, even in case where there is a legitimate and solid ground to call Rohingya persecution a genocide. And so what we are seeing is the repeat of the Cold War, and the Burmese people are sandwiched between these giants.
Maung Zarni, difficult, challenging distressing situation, no doubt. Let me thank all of our guests for joining us and sharing their thoughts with us on this. Maung Zarni, Alistair Cook and Mike Harris. And thank you, as always, for joining us. From me, Ghida Fakhry, and the entire team, thank you for watching.